In Acts 5, after the day of Pentecost, all of the disciples in the new church were flourishing, and they were still in Jerusalem. A lot of great things going on. A couple of shocking things. One being in the 5th chapter of Acts, the continuing reporting of the start of the new church. You have the situation of Ananias and Sapphira that tried to deceive people and draw attention to themselves. We're such great givers. And they gave a sum of money that they pretended was all that they had, when in fact it wasn't. The fact that it didn't matter the amount of money gave. The issue was they tried to pretend that they were better than they were, giving more than they had. And God didn't take to that too well. So Ananias and Sapphira both dropped dead about 3 hours apart at the feet of Peter. Well, this put a lot of fear into a lot of people. But still, this fledgling church was attracting huge numbers of people. And we find in verse 12 of 5, it says, through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done among the people. And they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch, that's at the temple. Yet none of the rest dared join them, but the people esteemed them very highly. The reason they were afraid to join them was because of the news of Ananias and Sapphira, and they thought, I don't want to take the risk. Believers were increasingly added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that they brought the sick out into the streets and laid them on beds and couches, that at least the shadow of Peter passing by might fall on some of them. Also a multitude gathered from the surrounding cities to Jerusalem, bringing sick people and those who were tormented by unclean spirits, and they were all healed. We'll end there and just look at, for a moment, this report of people feeling that if I can get my loved one who is sick, mentally ill, physically ill, or whatever, if I can get them, I have to carry them here, if I can just position them so that nothing more than Peter's shadow walking by falls upon them, they'll be healed. Now, that's really not what I want to talk about, healing by shadow, but the business of Peter casting a shadow. All of us, we all know about shadows. And if you look the word shadow up, it's amazing the wide differences in meaning. It can be just simply shade. It can be comfort. It can be security. It can be protection. Naomi, when she returned, in the book of Ruth, when she returned from the land of Moab, and her daughter-in-law Ruth came with her, they congratulated Ruth coming from Moab to Israel, and they said, how glad we are that you have come to find refuge under the shadow of the wings of the Lord. So that's another use of the word shadow, is protection. But it's also a shadow. We'll say about people, so-and-so in his generation, he cast a long shadow. What do we mean by that? He had great impact, great influence. In that meaning, then, alone, I want us to focus on shadow. Every one of us casts a shadow. None of us are without a shadow. What kind of a shadow is it that we cast? What kind of impact? What kind of influence do we have? Peter's was so well known that people struggled for a spot to just have his passing shadow fall on them. God wants us to have in our homes, in our churches, in our communities, in our workplaces. He wants us to have a shadow, make a shadow that falls on people, that impacts them for good, for light, for the gospel, for what God can do for a soul, how he can rescue us and redeem us and change us, transform us. That's the kind of shadow he wants us to cast over other people. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of a shadow am I casting? One last thought. spiritually, the only way you and I can cast a shadow is if we're in the light. On a cloudy or dark day, there is no shadow. It's when we're in the light that we cast a shadow. So may we cast the kind of shadow that we will be pleased to give account for in judgment.